Eleanor Grayson sat in the folding chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the creases of her graduation gown crisp against her skin. At 70, she was the oldest graduate in the auditorium, and the weight of that fact pressed against her chest as heavily as the humid June air. The room buzzed with anticipation, parents snapping photos, students whispering excitedly, the hum of a future unfolding. But Eleanor's seat was at the very back, near the kitchen doors, where the clatter of dishes and the sharp tang of cleaning solution drifted through the cracks. She wasn't among the rows of young faces, bright with the arrogance of youth. No, she was here, tucked away, as if her presence were an afterthought. She adjusted her cap, the tassel brushing her cheek, and let her gaze drift to the stage. The dean, Dr. Harold Wentworth, stood at the podium, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Today," he said, "we celebrate the brightest minds, the future of our world." His eyes swept the crowd, but they never lingered on Eleanor. She doubted he even knew her name, despite the letter she'd written him months ago, pleading her case to walk across that stage like everyone else. It hadn't always been this way. 50 years ago, Eleanor had been a girl with dreams as big as the Texas sky. She'd wanted to study literature, to lose herself in the worlds of Austen and Woolf, to teach others to find solace in words. But life had other plans. A hasty marriage at 18, 2 children by 22, and a husband who saw her ambitions as a threat rather than a gift. "You're a mother now," he'd said, his voice like gravel. "Books won't feed the kids." So, she'd shelved her dreams, trading them for dishcloths and diapers, for years of quiet sacrifice in a small house that always smelled of laundry and regret. Her children, Michael and Clara, had grown up and moved on, Michael to a law firm in Dallas, Clara to a teaching job in Seattle. They sent cards on Mother's Day and called on her birthday, but the distance between them was more than miles. Eleanor didn't blame them. She'd raised them to fly, even if her own wings had been clipped. But when her husband passed 10 years ago, something shifted. The silence of the house became a canvas, and Eleanor began to paint her life anew. She enrolled in community college at 60, transferring to the university at 65. Night after night, she pored over textbooks, her eyes straining under the dim glow of a desk lamp, her heart alight with purpose. Now, here she was, at the finish line. Or so she'd thought. The letter from the dean's office had arrived 2 weeks ago, crisp and impersonal. Due to limited seating, it read, "We've assigned you a seat near the service area. We appreciate your understanding." Understanding. The word burned in her chest. She'd called the registrar, her voice steady but firm. "I've earned my place," she'd said. "I'm graduating with honors." The woman on the phone had been kind but unyielding. "It's just logistics, Mrs. Grayson. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. But it was personal. It was the story of her life being pushed to the edges, told her place was in the kitchen, not the spotlight. She'd swallowed it then. But now, she was done swallowing. The ceremony dragged on. Names called. Applause rising and falling like waves. Eleanor's name was one of the last. Her degree in English literature a quiet triumph no one seemed to notice. As she stood, her knees ached, but her spine was steel. She walked to the stage, her steps deliberate, ignoring the whispers from the younger graduates. "Is that someone's grandma?" one muttered. Eleanor's lips twitched into a faint smile. Let them talk. She'd earned this moment. Dr. Wentworth handed her the diploma, his smile perfunctory. "Congratulations," he said, already looking past her to the next student. But as their hands brushed, Eleanor held his gaze for a fraction longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. He blinked, startled, but she was already moving off the stage, her diploma a weight of victory in her hands. Back at her seat, the kitchen doors swung open again, a waiter balancing a tray of coffee urns. The noise grated, but Eleanor barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, spinning with a fire she hadn't felt in years. She thought of the dean's words, his dismissive letter, the way he'd looked through her. She thought of every time she'd been told to stay small, to stay quiet. And she made a decision. Right there in the shadow of the kitchen, she wasn't done yet. That night, in her small apartment, Eleanor sat at her desk, the diploma framed on the wall above her. She opened her laptop, her fingers trembling not with age but with purpose. She began to write. Not a letter, not a complaint, but a story. Her story. The story of a woman who'd been pushed to the margins but refused to stay there. She wrote of her childhood dreams, her sacrifices, her late-night studies. She wrote of the kitchen at graduation, the sting of being unseen. But most of all, she wrote of resilience, of the quiet power that grows in the cracks of a life well lived. By dawn, she had 1,000 words. It wasn't enough, not yet. But it was a start. She titled it, simply, The Kitchen Seat. And as the first light of morning crept through her window, Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. She would make them see her. She would make the dean regret every word he'd written. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keyboard, the rhythm of her typing a quiet rebellion against the years of silence. The apartment was still, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of a cricket outside. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, each one a brick in the foundation of something bigger. The kitchen seat was no longer just a story, it was a manifesto, a declaration that she would not be erased. She wrote of her early years, of the girl who'd sneak library books under her pillow, reading by flashlight long after her parents thought she was asleep. She wrote of the scholarship she'd won at 17, only to have it snatched away when her father declared, "College is for boys." She wrote of the nights she'd spent teaching herself from borrowed textbooks, her children asleep in the next room, her husband's snores a reminder of the life she'd been funneled into. Each memory was a wound, but also a spark, fueling her resolve. By the third day, the story had grown to 2,000 words, and Eleanor felt a shift inside her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who'd been told her dreams were too big, her place too small. She thought of her classmates, the young women she'd met in her university courses, their eyes bright with ambition but shadowed by doubt. She thought of her own daughter, Clara, who'd once confessed she felt guilty for pursuing her career while Eleanor stayed home. "I didn't want you to stay home," Eleanor had told her. "I wanted you to soar." She paused, her hands hovering over the keys. The memory of Clara's graduation, 15 years ago, flickered in her mind. Eleanor had been in the front row then, her heart swelling as Clara crossed the stage. No one had tucked her daughter by the kitchen. No one had dared. So why had they done it to her? The question gnawed, but it also clarified her purpose. She wasn't just writing for herself, she was writing for Clara, for her classmates, for every person who'd ever been pushed aside. Eleanor saved her document and leaned back, her eyes drifting to the diploma on the wall. She'd graduated summa cum laude, a fact the dean's office had conveniently overlooked. She remembered the professor who'd pulled her aside after her final exam, a kind man with wire-rimmed glasses. "You're a natural scholar, Eleanor," he'd said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She hadn't. Not entirely. But the kitchen seat had been a reminder that the world still tried. She decided to take a break, stepping onto her small balcony to breathe the night air. The campus was visible in the distance, its spires lit against the sky. She'd loved her time there, the late-night discussions and study groups, the thrill of unraveling a complex text, the quiet pride of acing an essay. But the graduation had tainted it, a sour note in an otherwise sweet symphony. She wouldn't let it define her. The next morning, Eleanor walked to the local library, her manuscript printed and tucked under her arm. She decided to share it, but not with the dean, not yet. She found a writing group listed on the community board, a weekly gathering of local authors. The idea of reading her work aloud made her stomach twist, but she signed up anyway. If she was going to make the dean regret his words, she needed to start somewhere. The group met in a cozy room at the back of the library, surrounded by shelves of worn paperbacks. There were 8 members, a retired teacher, a young poet with a nose ring, a middle-aged man writing a sci-fi novel, and others, each with their own dreams. Eleanor was the oldest, but they welcomed her warmly, their curiosity genuine. When it was her turn to read, she hesitated, her hands trembling as she opened her folder. "I'm new at this," she began, her voice soft but steady. "This is called The Kitchen Seat." She read the first page, her words filling the room with a quiet power. She described the graduation, the clatter of dishes, the dean's dismissive smile. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. The poet, whose name was Maya, leaned forward, her eyes bright. "That's powerful," she said. "You've got something real here." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt seen, not as a mother, a widow, or an old woman, but as a writer, a voice. She left the library with feedback scribbled in the margins of her pages and a fire in her chest. The dean might have thought her place was by the kitchen, but she was carving out a new place, one where her words would echo far beyond that auditorium. The writing group became Eleanor's lifeline. Every Tuesday, she returned to the library, her manuscript growing with each meeting. The group's feedback sharpened her prose. But more than that, their encouragement gave her courage. Maya, the poet, suggested she submit The Kitchen Seat to a local literary magazine. "It's raw, but it's honest," she said. "People need to hear this." Eleanor wasn't sure she was ready, but the idea took root, a seed of possibility in the fertile ground of her newfound confidence. She spent her days refining the story, weaving in more details, the scent of her mother's rose garden, where she'd first dreamed of college, the way her son, Michael, had once drawn her a picture of a woman in a cap and gown, labeled Supermom. She wrote about the professor who'd believed in her, and the nights she'd cried over her textbooks, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer joy of learning. The story was no longer just about the graduation, it was about the life that had led her there. The battles fought in silence, the victories no one else had seen. One evening, as she revised a passage, her phone rang. It was Clara, her voice bright but tinged with worry. "Mom, are you okay? Michael said you're writing something big." Eleanor smiled, picturing her children conspiring across state lines. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said. "Just telling my story." There was a pause. Then Clara's voice softened. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I wish I'd known how much you wanted this." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I didn't want you to carry my dreams," she said. "I wanted you to have your own." They talked for an hour, longer than they had in years. Clara promised to visit soon. And when they hung up, Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known she'd been missing. Her story wasn't just for the dean, it was for her children, too. A legacy of resilience. She submitted The Kitchen Seat to the magazine the next week, her heart pounding as she clicked send. The editor, a woman named Rachel, called her a month later. "Your piece is stunning. she said. We'd like to publish it in our fall issue. Eleanor could barely speak. Her voice caught between joy and disbelief. Thank you, she managed. And when she hung up, she cried not from sadness, but from the weight of being heard. The magazine hit stands in October, and Eleanor's story spread like wildfire. Friends from her church called to congratulate her. Strangers emailed her, sharing their own stories of being overlooked, of fighting for their place. One woman, a retired nurse, wrote, "Your story made me feel like I could start again." Eleanor read each message, her heart swelling with a purpose she'd never imagined. But the real turning point came when a local bookstore invited her to read at their monthly author event. The room was small, but it was packed students, retirees, even a few professors from the university. Eleanor stood at the podium, her manuscript in hand, and read with a voice that trembled at first but grew stronger with every word. She described the kitchen seat, the dean's letter, the fire it had ignited in her. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and a young woman in the front row stood, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I needed to hear this." After the reading, a man approached her, his face familiar but hard to place. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Professor Daniels, from your literature seminar." Eleanor's heart skipped. He'd been the one who'd called her a natural scholar. "I read your piece," he continued. "It's extraordinary. I'd like to nominate it for the university's Alumni Literary Award." Eleanor stared, speechless. An award. She'd never dreamed of such a thing. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. He smiled. "Say yes." And so she did, her mind reeling with the possibility that her life might reach further than she'd ever thought possible. As she walked home that night, the campus lights glowing in the distance, Eleanor felt a shift. The kitchen seat was no longer a wound, it was a badge, a reminder of what she'd overcome. And she wasn't done yet. The dean's letter still sat in her drawer, a challenge unanswered. But now, with her story gaining wings, she knew exactly how to respond. The nomination for the Alumni Literary Award changed everything. Eleanor's story, once confined to the pages of a local magazine, began to circulate beyond her small town. A regional newspaper picked it up, running a feature titled "The Graduate Who Refused to Be Forgotten." The article included a photo of Eleanor at the bookstore reading, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes fierce with purpose. Strangers began to recognize her at the grocery store, offering smiles and kind words. "You're the kitchen seat lady," one cashier said, grinning. "You're amazing." Eleanor wasn't sure how to handle the attention. She'd spent most of her life invisible, her worth measured in clean dishes and folded laundry. Now, people wanted to hear her speak, to know her story. Invitations poured in book clubs, community centers, even a women's conference in Austin. Each time she spoke, she felt the weight of the kitchen seat lift a little more, replaced by the warmth of connection, of shared humanity. But the university remained silent. No apology, no acknowledgement of her story or its impact. Eleanor wasn't surprised, but she was disappointed. She'd hoped the dean might reach out, might see the error in his dismissive letter. Instead, the institution carried on, its spires as indifferent as ever. She could have let it go, could have basked in her growing recognition and called it enough. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She began working on a new piece, an open letter to the university, titled "The Seat I Deserved." It was bolder than the kitchen seat, more direct. She wrote of the systemic oversight of older students, of women, of anyone who didn't fit the mold of a traditional graduate. She cited studies she'd found in her research how older women were often discouraged from pursuing higher education. how their contributions were undervalued. She poured her heart into it, but also her mind, crafting an argument as sharp as it was emotional. When she read the draft to her writing group, Maya clapped her hands. "This is it," she said. "This is how you make them listen." The retired teacher, Mr. Thompson, suggested she send it to the university newspaper. "They can't ignore you if it's on their own turf," he said. Eleanor hesitated. The idea of confronting the institution directly felt daunting, but also right. She revised the letter one last time, her words polished to a fine edge, and submitted it. The university newspaper published it in their spring issue, just as the campus prepared for the next graduation. The response was immediate. Students shared the letter on social media, tagging the university's official accounts. Faculty members emailed her, some offering support, others admitting they'd never considered the impact of seating arrangements or dismissive policies. A group of graduate students organized a petition, demanding better treatment for non-traditional students. Eleanor's inbox overflowed with messages, some from alumni as far away as California, thanking her for giving voice to their own struggles. One afternoon, as she sorted through the emails, her phone rang. It was Professor Daniels again. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm but urgent. "The Literary Award Committee wants you to speak at their ceremony. It's next month, on campus. They're honoring your story." Eleanor's breath caught. The ceremony would be in the same auditorium where she'd sat by the kitchen. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent the next weeks preparing her speech, her hands steady now, her heart full. She wanted to honor not just her own journey, but the countless others who'd been pushed to the margins. She wrote of resilience, of the power of words to reshape the world. She practiced in front of her mirror, her reflection no longer just an old woman, but a force, a voice that refused to be silenced. The day of the ceremony arrived, crisp and clear, the campus alive with spring. Eleanor wore a simple black dress, her silver hair pulled back, her diploma tucked in her bag as a reminder. The auditorium was full, but this time, her seat was in the front row, reserved with her name in bold letters. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her, but she didn't shrink. She stood taller, her heart a steady drum. When she took the stage, the applause was warm, genuine. She looked out at the sea of faces: students, faculty, even a few administrators. She didn't see the dean, but she didn't care. This moment was hers. She began to speak, her voice clear and strong, weaving her story into a call for change. "I sat by the kitchen," she said, "but I will not stay there. None of us should." The room erupted, and for the first time, Eleanor felt the weight of her own power. The awards ceremony marked a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Eleanor's speech went viral, shared across platforms with hashtags like kitchen seat and never too late. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing her about her journey. She spoke with grace, but also with fire, calling out the systems that marginalize older students, women, and anyone who dares to dream outside the expected timeline. Her words resonated, sparking conversations in classrooms and boardrooms alike. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived from the university. It was on official letterhead, signed by Dr. Harold Wentworth himself. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it, expecting another dismissive note. Instead, it was an invitation. "Dear Mrs. Grayson," it began, "I would like to meet with you to discuss your recent contributions to our community and your experience at graduation." The words were polite, but guarded, as if the dean were testing the waters. Eleanor debated declining. She didn't know him anything, not after the way she'd been treated. But curiosity and a flicker of defiance won out. She agreed to the meeting, scheduling it for the following week. She spent the days leading up to it preparing, not just for a conversation, but for a confrontation. She reread her letter, "The seat I deserved," and gathered notes from her research. Her arguments honed like a blade. The meeting took place in the dean's office, a cavernous room lined with books and framed degrees. Dr. Wentworth stood as she entered, his smile tight but professional. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor sat, her posture straight, her eyes locked on his. She noticed the way his hands fidgeted, the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. He was nervous, and that gave her strength. "I read your piece in the newspaper," he began, "and I saw your speech. You've made quite an impact." His tone was measured, but Eleanor caught the undercurrent of discomfort. "I want to apologize for the seating arrangement at graduation. It was an oversight, not intentional." Eleanor didn't flinch. "An oversight," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "But it wasn't just about the seat, Dr. Wentworth. It was about what it represented. I worked as hard as any student here, harder. Maybe. And yet, I was pushed to the edges, told my place was less important." The dean shifted in his chair, his smile fading. "I understand your perspective," he said. "We're reviewing our policies to ensure this doesn't happen again." It was a start, but Eleanor wasn't here for platitudes. She leaned forward, her hands clasped. "It's not just about policies," she said. "It's about seeing people really seeing them. I was invisible to you, to this institution, but I'm not invisible anymore." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Then, to her surprise, Dr. Wentworth nodded. "You're right," he said, his voice softer now. "I didn't see you, and I'm sorry." It wasn't the groveling apology she'd imagined, but it was something, a crack in the armor of indifference. They talked for an hour, discussing changes to the university's approach to non-traditional students. Eleanor suggested mentorship programs, scholarships for older learners, and a review of graduation protocols. To her surprise, the dean listened, taking notes. "I'd like you to be part of this," he said as the meeting ended. "Your voice matters." Eleanor left the office with mixed feelings. The apology was a victory, but it was also a reminder of how much work remained. She wasn't naive. She knew one meeting wouldn't change the world, but it was a step, and she'd learned long ago that steps, no matter how small, could lead to great distances. That evening, she called Clara and Michael, sharing the news. "You made him listen, Mom," Michael said, his voice thick with pride. Clara laughed through tears. "You're unstoppable." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. She'd made the dean regret his words, not through anger, but through the quiet power of her story. As she sat at her desk that night, Eleanor began a new project, a memoir, weaving together the threads of her life. She titled it "From the Kitchen to the Stage," a testament to her journey. The words flowed easily now, each one a step toward a future she was building, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told their place was less. Eleanor's memoir took shape over the next year, each chapter a piece of her soul laid bare. She wrote of her childhood, her marriage, her children, and the long, winding road to her degree. She wrote of the kitchen seat, not as a moment of defeat, but as the spark that ignited her voice. The process was grueling some nights. She cried as she typed, reliving old pains. But it was also healing, a way to reclaim the narrative of her life. The university implemented some of her suggestions. A scholarship for older students was established, named in her honor, the Eleanor Grayson Fund. A mentorship program paired non-traditional students with faculty advisors, ensuring they felt seen. Graduation protocols were revised, with a commitment to equitable seating. Eleanor attended the next ceremony, this time in the front row, as a guest speaker. Her words were brief but powerful. Your place is where you make it. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Her memoir, From the Kitchen to the Stage, was published by a small press the following spring. It wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. It found its way into the hands of those who needed its students. Mothers, retirees, anyone who'd ever felt invisible. Book clubs invited her to speak, and she traveled when she could, sharing her story in small rooms and large auditoriums alike. Each time, she saw her own journey reflected in the eyes of her audience. Their tears and nods a reminder of the universal need to be heard. Clara and Michael attended one of her readings, sitting in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. Afterward, they took her to dinner, the three of them laughing and reminiscing like they hadn't in years. You've changed things, Mom, Clara said, squeezing her hand. Michael nodded. You made the world bigger for all of us. Eleanor didn't see the dean again, but she heard he'd referenced her story in a speech about institutional change. It was a small victory, but it mattered. She'd made him regret his words, not through vengeance, but by proving him wrong, by showing the world what a woman like her could do. As she approached her 72nd birthday, Eleanor stood on her balcony, the campus lights a familiar glow in the distance. She was still writing, still speaking, still learning. Her apartment was filled with books, her desk cluttered with letters from readers. She'd started a blog, sharing essays on resilience and education, and it had a small but loyal following. She didn't need fame or fortune, just the knowledge that her words were making a difference. One evening, a package arrived from the university. Inside was a framed certificate, recognizing her contributions to the community. Attached was a note from the dean. Mrs. Grayson, your voice has reshaped our institution. Thank you. She smiled, tucking the note into her drawer alongside the original letter about the kitchen seat. They were bookends to her story, proof of how far she'd come. Eleanor sat at her desk, her laptop open, a new essay taking shape. She wrote of hope, of the power of standing up, of the beauty of a life reclaimed. As the words flowed, she felt a quiet certainty. She'd been pushed to the kitchen, but she'd built her own stage. And from that stage, she'd speak for as long as she had breath, ensuring no one else would be left in the shadows. Her story wasn't just hers, Anna Maria, it was a beacon, a reminder that it's never too late to claim your place, to make the world hear your voice. And in that truth, Eleanor found her peace.